Good afternoon, my conscious co-creators. Good morning, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. I am very, very pleased that you are all here with me today. We've got another fascinating show in store for you today with a very unusual guest, and we'll bring him on in just a moment. But first, of course, we do have my blog post from a couple of years ago. Just kind of taking them in order, yet somehow they seem to be so apropos for the show this week. So, this week's blog post is entitled, "When we find our true soul's calling, we are truly free." We often battle with ourselves. Inside of us, we can feel a deep split between our soul's calling and the world's calling. For even when we know the truth, it is hard to go against our programming. From the time we are young, the world wants us to fit into a certain box, a box of who we are and what we should contribute to the world, of how we should act, how we should dress, and what we should be doing with our lives. This programming comes to us from our parents, our friends, our schools, the media, and literally everything around us. And if we are unfortunate enough to not fit into those boxes, the world will punish us for it, especially if we were born the wrong gender or orientation, or if we are not a masculine man or a feminine woman. Even if we are too smart or not smart enough, there is always something that doesn't fit into society's expectation of us. Maybe we are expected to be the breadwinner in the family when all we want to do is take care of the children or the home. Perhaps the opposite is true for us, yet we are the wrong gender to be the main financial support of the family. It can even be as subtle as being expected to do as well in school as our siblings, even if we can't stand school. All of these external pressures build up over the years. We take on this false identity. We live our lives as a lie and even convince ourselves that we're doing the right thing. Yet our soul keeps calling. Our true self that is buried deep within us cannot be denied forever. And it's a calling that will cause friction inside of us. That friction will eventually burn us. We will either cast off the false chains of society or we will end ourselves, for the pain is too great to ignore. Ultimately, the best thing we can do is listen to our soul's calling, to seek it out and find it in the most unexpected places. For once we recognize what is true for us deep inside, we cannot go back. We can only move forward towards our true self. And when we come close and touch it, even for a moment, we will feel the bliss of liberation. For the liberation from society's expectations is the greatest freedom of all. When we are truly aligned with our soul, we are home. Can you feel your soul calling to you deep inside? Mm. I actually had forgotten I had written this blog post. And I kind of feel like there was a number of things kind of came together that caused me to write this. Um, and having, worked with people as a coach and a mentor and a facilitator, um, I have a lot of people come to me and they're confused. They don't know what they really want to do with their lives. And it's so interesting how when we work together, often I find it's not that they don't know, it's about having the courage to face up to the truth that's within themselves that they don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a CPA or a programmer, that they want to be an artist or a dancer or do something that's completely outside of societal norms. Maybe they want to join the Peace Corps. Maybe they want to go help some small village in Africa or in Southeast Asia, create a well and help people to live a better life. And I cannot help but think of the original founder of this network, Giorgio Rapetti, who, when I met him, he had decided to become a Buddhist monk and don his robes and take his vows. And he was a young gentleman in his, mid to late 30s at the time, an amazing acupuncturist, a tremendous healer. And every single person in his life was telling him it's a mistake. No, don't do it. You're young. Wait until later. And he was just like, I'm done with society. I'm done with this stuff. I just want to go off and meditate and cultivate my spiritual practice. And I really honored him for that. And I feel grateful that I was able to help him to realize his dream by purchasing his business and taking it over. And I've been running talk radio.nyc now for the last almost 15 years. And it's been an amazing ride. And I really have to give thanks to Giorgio, but he had the courage to listen to his soul's calling. And it was interesting. I remember a conversation I had with him where he said, if I told people, oh, I just want to make a lot of money and buy a big house and do all this stuff, everyone would be, yeah, great, Giorgio, go for your dreams. That'd be wonderful. But if I say I want to cultivate my spiritual practice and meditate all day long, people are like giving me all a hard time. And it just goes to show the societal prejudice that's in all of us. Keep in mind that these people I'm talking about, that were his clients, his friends, they weren't bad people. They weren't people who wished him ill. They actually sincerely wanted the best for him, but they were so caught up in their own ideas of what it means to have a good life and so conditioned by society that they couldn't accept the idea of someone becoming a Buddhist monk and going off to spend the rest of his life meditating and begging for food every day. Now, look, that calling is not for me. It's not for most people in society. But for those who feel called to it, why would we not want them to follow their soul's calling? So that encounter has stayed with me all these 15 years. It's always been a very important lesson to me. I've seen him a couple of times. He's come back to visit with his robes, and it's been a few years though. I don't think I've seen him since before the pandemic. I hope he's doing well. Um, but yeah, so Giorgio, I'll dedicate this blog post to you, even though I'm pretty sure like you weren't the impetus for this, but just reading through it now and thinking about these things, I'm reminded of you. So wherever you are in the world, should you ever listen to this episode, Bante, this episode's for you. So thank you. Well, that's my blog post for today. I hope it resonates with you. I hope you get something from it and it means something for you. Again, the title of this blog post is When We Find Our True Soul's Calling, We Are Truly Free. And if you like this blog post, you might like my book if you haven't already gotten it. Everyday Awakening. You are more powerful than you know, and you can find it on Amazon and all the major booksellers. And yeah, and if you want to read more of my blog posts, you can always find them on my personally branded website, theconsciousconsultant.com, or of course on the station's website, talkradio.nyc/blog. All right. Quite a way to start off the show, but now it is my pleasure to welcome to the show psychedelic researcher and author Wade Richardson. Wade is a psychonaut with more than 15 years of experience participating in and facilitating hundreds of psychedelic sessions. His latest book is Psychedelic Mindmeld, Telepathically Exploring Shared Consciousness. In this guide to psychedelic mind melding, Wade shows how, with the aid of psychedelics, sharing consciousness is possible. He presents techniques for entering and maintaining a psychedelic mind meld and looks at safe set and setting for psychedelic telepathic work, including preparations, finding the right partner, and potential challenges. Welcome to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Wade.
Thank you, Sam. I'm glad to be here and yeah, honored to be on your show. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time and making the time to come on. I truly appreciate it. Um, so I've had many authors come on who've touched upon psychedelics. I've recently had on Dr. Rick Strausman, author of the book DMT, the God Molecule. This is one particular topic that I personally am very interested in and love bringing people on. But I don't think I've ever had anyone on where we sort of crossed over that line between sort of psychedelics and psychic phenomena. And I'm curious, like, first, what got you initially interested in psychedelics, and then specifically what got you interested in psychedelics and psychic phenomena like telepathy?
Yeah, well, I mean, we take a big step back in time, where I was kind of more, I would say, agnostic, leaning into atheism. And I mean, the story's long. I'll try to keep this brief, but I'd been working for an Aboriginal man who was a chief, and there was this story of resilience that he had gone through a lot of difficulty in his life, and I really wanted to tell that story. And I ended up going to a spiritual retreat with my girlfriend at the time, which I was kind of reluctant to do, but she was really big into it. So I'm like, sure, let's do that. And given the nature of the work I was doing at the time, it made sense for me to go to this talk on shamanism. So I went to it, and it was on soul retrieval. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. And it would be a neat backdrop for the story I want to tell of resilience. So I ended up writing this fictional story and doing a ton of research on shamanism. And, but frankly, not believing any of it. I was like, yeah, this is really intriguing, but, it's probably a lot of fantasy and imagination. And kind of left it at that. A few years went by, and then I met someone telling about the story that I'd written. And they're like, oh, you should try this ayahuasca retreat. And I was like, yeah, I've written about it. I should probably give that a go. And so I went to this ayahuasca retreat, knowing that intention was important. And the shaman, of course, wanted to experience more joy. And she asked me a couple really quick questions and was right on top of me, having a blockage towards spirituality.
Hmm.
And I was like, yeah, that's true. And she's like, well, I think you should open your heart to spirituality as a potential intention for this ceremony. So I was like, yeah, sure. So we went into the ceremony, took the ayahuasca. I sat down, I wasn't going to move. And I wasn't going to close my eyes either because I didn't want that kind of dreamlike imagination creating some kind of falsity in my mind. I was, highly skeptical. And so I'm sitting there, time is passing, and this portal opens up in the floor, which was in front of the shaman who was to the right of me. And immediately I'm like, oh, that's the portal. I've read so much about it. And, what do I do? How do I go into that? And as I'm asking all these questions, really caught in my own intellect, all of a sudden this massive praying mantis pops out of it and, it's like human sized and is right in front of me, basically reaches in with its claws, opens up my chest and performs this open heart surgery on me, which is
Mm.
kind of freaking me out, but it feels like it's meant to happen and it honestly feels great and healing. So I just observed and let it happen. And of course, the whole time my mind is being completely blown away by what is this?
And
And
wait, quick clarification. Were your eyes
sure,
open the whole time?
my eyes were open the whole time. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So, and then, yeah, I mean, for the following months and yeah, I mean, arguably years, I was just like, wow, what is this? I mean, there's something very profound here. So I continued to go to ceremonies after that and did a ton more reading. And yeah, that was kind of my introduction. But then the second part of your question, like in terms of the psychic piece, um,
I'll tell you what.
there was a couple experiences that go ahead.
Why don't we hold it there? Let's go to break, and when we come
Sure.
back, let's talk about the psychic connection to the medicine retreats. Okay.
Yeah, sounds great, Sam.
All right, great. Thanks, Wade. All right, everyone, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We do this every Thursday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on talkradio.nyc and all over social media. We're speaking this hour with Wade Richardson, author of the book, The Psychedelic Mindmeld, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
And welcome back to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We're speaking this hour with Wade Richardson, author of the book, The Psychedelic Mindmeld. So Wade, we were talking about, your initial ayahuasca experience and how you kind of came to working with plant medicine work and psychedelics. And so the next part of that question was like, how did that interest in sort of that crossover between psychedelics and psychic phenomena, in particular telepathy, come onto your radar or catch your interest?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those things where I didn't know it was a thing, and it was yeah, a spontaneous occurrence. I had some over the years leading up to the telepathy. I had out of body experiences. I was familiar with wow, there's lots of big, incredible, and strange things that are possible with psychedelics. But a number of years had passed, and I went with a friend down to Mexico, and kind of a neat story of synchronicity. We were actually there for some sporting events, and a shaman called me up, who I'd worked with for a number of years at this point, and she's like, "Oh, we're doing a ceremony in Mexico." Well, it turned out to be the very same small town that we were in. And
Wow.
my friend had wanted to do ayahuasca, but was not comfortable doing it in our original hometown, just because, as a professional, he was worried about, being kind of called out. And so, yeah, we went to the ceremony. And it was a pretty big ceremony. We were in the jungle. There's about 30 people with about, 3 or 4 shamans leading it. And we get started, and the first couple of days, not much happened for me. And I was frankly quite disappointed with that. My friend, who was struggling with alcoholism, which was one of the reasons he wanted to do the ceremony, was profoundly struggling and feeling sick through those first couple of days, which for people struggling with substance abuse, that's not unusual. But we get into the third day, and I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm not sure where this is going. That, it was kind of an evening that was starting out a bit slowly, and I really asked myself, well, why am I here? And it really was for my friend. And so then I started to just kind of meditate on kind of an open heart meditation without thinking anything significant was going to happen. It was just kind of a place to be in for me and work through. And all of a sudden, within, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 minutes of starting this meditation, I had this massive amount of energy shoot up through my body. And he was sitting to my right, and all of a sudden, my right arm just spontaneously reached out and grabbed his head. And as we're talking about, I've had been doing psychedelics already for a number of years, and so I was used to the weirdness, and of course this was kind of upping it a bit. But I was like, hey, just go with the flow. So there I am sitting in the dark with my hand on his head, and then I started to kind of shake, and I felt this profound grief come through me, and I started bawling my eyes out. But I just went with it, and that continued on for 20 minutes, half an hour. And it was difficult, to say the least. It was they're very deep emotions, and definitely a lot of struggle in that. But that kind of played out, and there were other things that happened in that evening. But the point is that there was this telepathic exchange, and I, of course, at the time didn't even really understand what it was. And I asked my friend the next morning, well, what was his experience? And he said to me that he had a daughter. I knew this part of the story in terms of that he did have a daughter who had died at an early age. I think she was somewhere
Wow.
between 4 and 6 of it. And so he's a physician and, incapable of saving her. And this would have been it was a very profound trauma for his family. And he said that that particular night was the first time he was able to actually let go of his grief and just kind of reconcile the death of his daughter. And so I didn't get any story in my experience, but when he shared that with me, I was like, I just completely understood it. And it was like, wow, like we really shared in that together. And that was really the beginning of it. Of course, continued after that. So
Right. So you happen to mention something, so I think we should talk about this for a minute, about him being concerned about people knowing what he was doing with this work. And as my audience who's watching the live stream can see, they're seeing an avatar of Wade Richardson, and they're not seeing Wade Richardson himself. And indeed, even Wade Richardson isn't your actual name, is it? So I'm wondering if, just very briefly, we can talk about why. Why are you using an avatar? Are you using a pseudonym for this book?
well, it's interesting because, of course, you opened the show with your blog post, and it kind of speaks to this interesting challenge that we faced with, where there's this kind of sole purpose that comes through, and certainly that's the case for me in terms of working with psychedelics and various forms of meditation. But at the same time, we're caught in this society where most psychedelics at least are illegal. And of course, there's repercussions that can come with that. And I've had friends who, it's kind of underground, but then the wrong person finds out, and there might be a conversation with this person who leads to that person. The next thing, the police are at the door, right? And that's an issue. Of
Yeah.
course, the other side of that is, my professional life. People in the work that I'm engaged in are certainly, for the most part, materialists, and in terms of management and that,
Yeah.
and so that is an issue. Another component is, this is going to be a controversial book. There's some people who are going to be, yeah, that totally makes sense. I get it and resonate with it. But for others, potentially the religious fundamentalist right is just one example, might really strongly react to it. And Martin Ball, who wrote the foreword, is an example. He's been out there. He's written a lot of books on psychedelic. He's a very public figure. And, someone at one point showed up to his house and vandalized his house because they just weren't
Oh,
happy with the work that he was doing and writing
wow.
about. And, this is, he's a family man, right? He has a
Yeah.
son and a wife, and they were forced to move. And I
Wow.
don't want to be faced with those types of headaches either. So
Yeah.
it's a difficult place to be in.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because this work is all about love and compassion and expanding consciousness and being better people. And so to hear that, like, there are some people in society who don't kind of get the message and like
Mhm.
they're vehemently opposed to this whole endeavor and this whole inquiry. Myself living in New York City, we don't kind of see much of that, but I guess in other parts of the country, people still do. So to me, it's kind of a sad commentary on society that people feel the need to do violence against someone just because they're exploring a different way of living their life. So I can completely understand, and this is
Mhm.
why I agreed to have you come on the show, even though knowing that we're using your avatar and that Wade isn't your real name. So, but thank you for your bravery because you never know who might put one, two, and two together and realize who you are. So, thank you.
Mhm.
Um, so I do want to get back to the book. So you had this experience, um, and then, what kind of led you to then decide to want to write a book about it? Because it's one thing to then say, "Oh, I had this weird experience. I want to understand it and explore that a little bit more." But it's another thing to decide to write a book about it.
Yeah, no, fair. And it was quite a few years of working with telepathy. It was just something that I did, and it was just kind
Mhm.
of, I would meet people through a variety of means, you could argue, through synchronicity, some through friends. And so the work continued for a number of years. And, I was in a severe accident, which I mentioned in the book. And
Uh,
that kind of, threw things into disarray, but it also, at a certain point, created some openness and time to engage in an activity like this, like writing a book.
mhm.
So I was already thinking of writing another book, which was more on psychedelic integration, but it was one of those things as I started writing that it was kind of that proverbial thing when writing, like write what you know.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, the telepathy thing. I just kind of came to me, and it was like, no one else is like, because I started doing some research, like, well, what else has been written on this subject? And it turns out
Mhm.
that very little has actually been written on it. Although, funny enough, it gets acknowledged quite often in the literature, but it tends to be
Right.
like a paragraph in the book here and there. And there's been the odd, very small study on it, but yeah, there's not much on it in terms of, again, looking at psychedelic telepathy. I mean, there's a lot out there on telepathy. I mean, telepathy writ large is actually very well studied, but in terms of the psychedelic component, not much is out there. So that was inspiring for me. And of course, another big component in that is, kind of getting the word out in terms of what we as humans are capable of, our capacity. And of course, in terms of sharing consciousness, there's a psychonautical exploration there. But when we get into that exploration, we find a whole new level of intimacy that we could not have
Mm.
previously imagined. Much deeper love, and also the potential to see each other and act as healers of each other. So I found
Mhm.
all of that very compelling.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Okay. We're going to take our next break. When we come back, let's talk about maybe giving our audience some ground rules or some basics for if somebody out there is listening and they already are using psychedelics and they want to um, explore this as well, like what some basic do's and don'ts around that, okay?
Sure.
Wonderful, wonderful. So everyone, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We're speaking this hour with Wade Richardson, author of the book, The Psychedelic Mindmeld, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marcanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
So Wade, if someone's listening to this interview and they they want to pick up a copy of your book, The Psychedelic Mindmeld, they get it, and they want to start doing some of this exploration for themselves, how would you recommend they start? What are some basic do's and don'ts that they should consider?
Yeah, well, I think let's first say that this is a very big topic. We could spend the rest of the show talking about it, and so I'm going to
Probably many
because we
hours.
don't. Yeah, because we have limited time, I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights. And of course, for someone who really does want to take a deep dive, they can get the book. But let's just open by saying this is an advanced practice. This is not for the neophyte or recreational user. This is actually really hard work. Let's put that in there.
Yeah.
That this isn't something that is done for fun.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of kind of prerequisites, certainly people want to have experience with psychedelics already. They need to be very familiar with, what is possible with psychedelics, the exploration of consciousness, diving into the shadow at an energetic level, understanding their own energy, and what, processing trauma and clearing energy through the use of psychedelics, what that is like. So there's all those components. There's some kind of simple things in terms of, being in good medical health, having a good set in terms of, good mental health. If someone is struggling profoundly with their own trauma or, some type of mental illness, those types of things should be, well resolved in terms of doing this before doing this type of work. Of course, at the same time, recognizing that, none of us are perfect. We all have our own challenges and difficulties, and we certainly all have our own shadows. But of course, those things can present themselves. So there needs to be a comfort with that arising within oneself, because if you can't deal with your own stuff, so to speak, how are you going to deal with that arising in someone else when you are actually sharing so deeply in that experience, their emotions and the challenges that they are in? So that's a really big piece. Another piece is, finding the right partner. I mean, ultimately, this is about a huge piece of trust. You need to find someone that certainly isn't going to drop into some type of sexual engagement. We'll come back to that, because that in itself is a really big subject.
Yeah.
Inappropriately. Of course, again, someone else that, you're working with co-creatively. It's not like someone has this huge ego and they want to run the show. This has to be a real give and take. So there's a partnership in it. So that is very important to kind
And
of
it
work
sounds
through.
like a very deep level of trust is needed, not a superficial trust, but a really like, someone you trust your life with.
Yeah, yeah. So in that context, I think this is something that would be really good for, a longer married couple that has a really solid relationship and, possibly working within the family or something, at least to get started,
Hmm.
just to kind of build that foundation. So there's those components. And then, yeah, coming back to the sexual piece, I mean, that's really complicated because, we are sexual beings.
Right.
It's certainly, in my experience, and for all the people I've worked with, it's pretty normal, especially at the beginning of the session when the psychedelic is coming on, and it depends a little bit on the psychedelic, but
Mhm.
that there is kind of this exchange or this opening of sexual energy, and it tends to be fleeting in most cases, lasting anywhere from seconds to maybe a few minutes. But when engaging with this work, we're lying beside each other, holding hands, and it's not that physical touch is required for telepathy, but it is a way of engaging and kind of, helping us to be very conscious of who we're with and, kind of where we're targeting our minds.
Hmm.
But yeah, again, that type of touch can also, create a sexual energy. And I found it interesting because I identify as a cis male. And I've worked with both men and women, and it's interesting to see when working with psychedelics, the fluidity of sexual energy. So
Mm.
it's something to be very aware about. And of course, even talking about it, I find is a bit of an antidote to working with it
Right.
in the session.
Right.
Just knowing that it's there because it's really, when working this way, it's meant to be kind of seen and observed. You can kind of even try to work into, well, where is this even coming from within me?
Mm.
Um, and so working through it at a meditative level and to see that it's very fleeting, and so by
Mhm.
working past that energy, usually people end up going much deeper. So again, coming back to trust, you have to trust that the person you're working with isn't going to, be kind of caught up, shall we say, in the sexual energy and act out on it,
Mhm.
because of course that crosses all sorts of boundaries. And
Right.
certainly, I recommend in this work that there is no sexual engagement at all. Even with the married couple, it's like if you're going to do that, all of that is planned out
Hmm.
in advance. So because there are complexities, and it's like, are you looking to create, let's say, with a consenting couple, drop into sexuality, or are you working in towards a much deeper telepathic connection? So,
Hmm.
those types of things need to be navigated ahead of the session. So, yeah, so I think those are kind of the big high points. We could talk more about all of those, but I think that captures it in a nutshell.
So, thank you for that. No, that's very good and very foundational. It's really understanding sort of the basics of uh, any kind of altered altered state of consciousness, and being very mindful of who you're with, of the setting, the surrounding, the substance. All of that comes into play. Um, is there anything that you learned from endeavors into sort of telepathy and psychic phenomena in general outside of psychedelics that you found very important to consider when you're bringing the two together?
Yeah, well, that's, I think you're the first person that's actually asked that. And yes, absolutely. I've done a lot of research into out of body experiencing, that there's the near death experiencing work, and other modalities like that. Of course, shamanism touches a lot of that work as well in terms of leaving the body. But what I'm coming back to is really the power of thought form. And thought form
Mhm.
is amazingly powerful. And I would argue that most people, especially in Western society, don't understand how true that is. And especially when you're, in a holotropic or altered state of consciousness, especially like if you're out of your body, basically your mind stream creates your reality. And,
Mm.
in that context, it's kind of like, And that's not in an absolute way, because if we really want to take a deeper dive, there's the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
So we can drop into that, and it's kind of, if we can kind of come back to the dream world. So it's like, okay, so you wake up in your dream and you become lucid. So being lucid in a dream, of course, would be, I'm aware that I'm dreaming and I can shift what is happening in the dream. But rarely can people, look into the sky, it's a blue sky, and go, oh, I want a purple sky, because the
Yeah.
environment is kind of much deeper at kind of, again, that collective unconscious, almost archetypal level,
Right.
which is usually, for most people going to be not possible to change. But at the same time, they can use the thought form of, hey, I want to fly. And so they can, start to fly in their lucid dream. So again, working with thought form is a very powerful, important thing to be aware of. And it's, to come back to the example of when I was in Mexico, I drop into this meditation, of opened heart meditation, towards my friend, right? And so I talk
Mm.
about that as a meditation technique in the book, because
Mm.
that thought form of connection is enough to actually create the connection.
Mm.
So thought form is extremely powerful, and that's again something we could talk more about. But yeah, that kind of gives the highlight of its importance.
I find it interesting because I'm thinking back to other interviews that I've done, like Christopher Bache, who wrote the book LSD in the Mind of the Universe, who did these, over 70 high dose LSD sessions to explore like the fundamental nature, the ontological nature of the universe. And recently I had on Paul Levy, who wrote the book, the Wetiko and the Quantum Revelation, talking about how, according to quantum physics, reality, it's like the analogy of a dream is actually reality on a very fundamental quantum physics level. And so it kind of, to me, it sounds like this is a reinforcement of those ideas that actually reality is a dream, and perhaps psychedelics is a way of accessing it to be sort of like a waking dream, like to be able to sort of access the dream-like quality of reality in a way that when where normal consciousness is a little more challenging to access.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I've read those books, and yeah, certainly resonate with what those men have written. And I talk about this in the integration section of the
Um,
book as well. Like basically, life is a dream, So it's kind of one of those things. We can have all of these, variety of experiences with psychedelics, whether we're doing so telepathy and shared consciousness or individually.
mhm.
And it's very interesting, because the ego, of course, wants to create a bigger self-esteem and a greatness for
Right,
itself. And in that, it creates a lot of delusion, right? So it's kind of that
right.
proverbial thing. Someone takes a psychedelic, they have a connection to the cosmic Christ, or something like it. And all of a sudden, oh, I am Jesus Christ.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, at one level, you could say, well, that's true, because we all are Jesus
right.
Christ, in terms of all resonating with Christ consciousness at a deeper level.
Mm.
But the delusion, of course, comes where it's like, no, I am Jesus Christ. I have a mission. No one else is Jesus Christ. I am
Yeah.
the reincarnated one. And like, and I've strangely, I've actually met some of those people who really do believe and claim that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, right. So it's kind of one of those difficult things that needs to be navigated, and yeah, just kind of worked through in terms of, well, what is reality? And I keep coming back to the dream. Like, don't hang on to anything too tightly.
Right, exactly. That we're actually creating these visions that we're getting. It's actually coming from us. Uh, Really quickly, you just mentioned something that brought up a question in my mind. If somebody wants to do sort of psychic development work but doesn't have a partner on psychedelics, um, is it possible for them to sort of practice telepathy or some kind of psychic development while on psychedelics as well, by themselves?
Uh, well, I would say not the telepathy part, but
Yeah.
it's something, yeah, I've certainly explored. There's an article I wrote for an Australian magazine a little while back that explores that very subject. And it's like, in terms of targeting psychic development, working again with particular thought forms. And I think a really big one is leaving the body, because, to leave the body, whether you're using psychedelics or not, is a really big deal. And it, if you really kind of dive into the literature, it requires a full reprogramming of the subconscious mind. And it is something I've done without psychedelics, but it's very difficult for me to do without psychedelics. I'd argue for most people, but there are some people it just comes naturally to. And there are these, if there's this literature, and there's a lot of different techniques for doing it, but it does require a fair amount of work, including, like a fairly common place for a jumping off point into out-of-body experience is the lucid dream. But even becoming lucid in the dream, someone, they have to become aware of their dream world first, right? So, and surprisingly, that's not that difficult. A lot of people will say, "Well, I don't dream," and which is just not true, right? I mean, from the dream research, we know that people are having upwards of 5 dreams a night if they're having a decent sleep. And, just little things like, going to bed and recognizing, hey, I dream every night, and just reminding myself, hey, I'm going to remember my dreams. I'm going to have good dreams. And that is a good starting point. And then, of course, in the morning, waking up, and the first thing that comes to mind, I know I was dreaming. What were my dreams? Another little piece to that, and this is kind of difficult, but not moving the body, because it turns out that as you move the body, that kind of distracts a lot from the dream world. But just, these types of little things. And like I say, there's a lot of literature out there. So there's, you kind of draw from the literature, and then you start to work with those thought forms in the psychedelic realm as an individual. Again, like just if you're on your own, hey, yeah, I want to leave my body, and then of course, maybe setting a destination and, doing the remote viewing or something like that. So there's lots of potential out there.
Yeah, I've not all the time, but many times have tried to engage in lucid dreaming, and the once or twice that I've actually been aware of dreaming when I was in the dream was not when I was trying to do one of the techniques of doing lucid dreaming. I haven't been able to really get it on command, so to speak, but I'm not done trying yet. All right, we got to take our last break of the show. When we come back, I'm going to ask you about maybe some caveats, and maybe play a little bit of devil's advocate around this. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So everyone, please stay tuned. You're listening to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We'll be right back with my guest, Wade Richardson, author of the book, The Psychedelic Mindmeld, in just a moment.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
So Wade, for someone who wants to engage in this exploration of telepathy and sort of psychic development while on psychedelics, what are some things to be careful of that can keep us from going off track?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we've already began to touch on some of that.
Mm.
In terms of, again, working with a partner, it's like, we're sharing each other's emotions. We're potentially sharing each other's trauma. Again, we are potentially even leaving our bodies together and journeying, through the universe, so to speak, together. Um, but, it's one of those things where we can get caught in the trap of, like, we drop in and all of a sudden, there's this really difficult energy coming up, and we can end up potentially projecting in terms of,
Uh,
like, just kind of pushing away from it. Oh, that's their stuff. It's, I don't want to deal with that and whatever, right? And it's one of those things where I really encourage this kind of the view of the bodhisattva in terms of coming in with, um, and not just the bodhisattva, but also kind of the non-dual approach,
mhm.
where all of it is me. I will accept any of the difficulty that arises. And the bodhisattva piece, of course, is to drop in at a compassionate level and, at a loving level in terms of accepting the other person, essentially as myself, and having a very deep compassion for whatever comes up and whatever difficulty comes up. And recognizing that, shadow elements are within all of us.
Mhm.
So it's one of those things where, we are all a mosaic of parts. We have all of the
Yeah.
personality parts potentially within us, and it's just, dependent on, again, some of the stuff that you pointed out at the very beginning of the show in
Mhm.
your blog post. We're affected by all of these different things in terms of, the environment, our parental upbringing, society at large, the culture, et cetera, et cetera. So we're very programmed, and just to kind of recognize that, who we are is often a result of these various programs. But at the bigger level, we are a mosaic of all personality, and they can show up at any time. And so those things are to be worked through. And that's one of the big things in terms of this type of engagement, that it is work. It can be really difficult. At the very same time that it can be very liberating, healing, and you can enter heavenly realms together.
Mm.
So all of these things are possible.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I also talked about, just kind of briefly, uh, the challenge of delusion, right, and fantasy.
Mhm.
So, those things are possible. And this
And I
also
want to
speaks, go
I
ahead.
want to touch upon that for a moment because I remember years ago, a long time ago, before I got back into medicine work, I went to a meeting of this organization that's all around out-of-body experience. And I remember asking the person who was like doing the presentation about, what about, people who do psychedelics and they have these out-of-body experiences? How do you consider that? And they had sort of a negative opinion of it. The guy said
Hmm.
that, you know, well, I said, why? And he said, well, when we have people following quote unquote our techniques, two people can have an out-of-body experience and see the same thing. But then if there's a third person who's using substances, they'll see something completely different. So I'm just curious, what's your take on that? I mean, no, we already talked about sort of this, and this is what you're about to get into, the delusion and the thinking, but like, is it so different from maybe the reality that other people are seeing who are not using psychedelics?
Well, I think that's a very complex subject, and I think a very short answer is no, that there's a ton of overlap. And it
Mm.
comes also back to thought form, and again, our own, biographical story, so to speak. So
Right.
I can, for example, be in shared consciousness, and it's like I might see, for example, like, let's say we come across something scary, or like a boogeyman, right? So let's say
Hmm.
that, a bear is chasing me,
Hmm.
but it might be to the other person that something other than a bear is chasing them. Maybe it's a tiger, but it's,
Hmm.
because what is happening is that there's an energy that's coming at a person, and then it's our biography that puts, let's say, the avatar on top of the energy. So my
Hmm.
history is like, I have more familiarity with bears. So I put a
Hmm.
bear on top of that, whatever that energy is that is bringing fear into me, whereas the other person might put a tiger on it. So, you get into the out-of-body literature, and that's pretty common too, where it's complicated because it's like, well, there's all these different maps, but if you kind of really come back to, well, what is the function of these various discarnate beings? That's where I think a better place is to step into, in terms of, like there's a gatekeeper or a facilitator or a healing energy or something that comes through kind of more at an archetypal level, as opposed to I see a particular face on something. And when you start to get into that stuff, I think it gets even more complex because our own biography puts layers onto, onto these different energies at an avatar level, we'll say. But at the same time, you have a discarnate being that approaches you because, discarnate beings are by nature telepathic. They can read into you and see, well, what is this person going to be most comfortable with? What avatar should I wear incarnate being in order to make them comfortable? So again, we don't have much time to get into this because it's such a complex subject, but I just want to, provide some ideas that this is really broad and vast, and there's just so many things going on that we don't. I don't want people to oversimplify. Or are we, seeing the same thing or not? And that is the answer, like in a very short, summative way, because we may or may not. That this comes back to the dream in terms of being more loose with our interpretations.
Right. Hold it lightly. Hold it lightly. Very quick question. For you, is the engagement with psychedelics a spiritual practice?
Yeah, absolutely it is. It's definitely, it goes back to what I opened with at the beginning of the show, was the praying mantis and the opening of my heart to spirituality. And that was the beginning, and it's just been nothing but expansiveness since then. It's just been so beautiful.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Wade. I wish we had a couple of more hours to dive really deep into these subjects. I could really chat with you about this forever. Any books in the works for the future?
I am working on another book, but I'm reluctant to talk about it other than to say it's on mysticism, and I guess you could say on thought form as well, that we've briefly discussed the power of thought.
Let me know when you come out with it. I'd love to have you back on the show and we can talk about it.
Yeah, sounds great, Sam. Thank you.
All right,
thanks for your show. I think you're doing great work.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I like taking a grounded approach to things, but also in particular, I'm very much interested in psychedelics. I'm also very much interested in spirituality. And I've talked about both of these topics on the show separately, but this is sort of a nice coming together of those two topics, because for me, I also believe that engagement in sacred substances and psychedelics is a spiritual practice. It's not just about healing. It's not just about mental health, although it can help our mental health and it can provide a lot of healing. But for me, I'm more interested in the higher consciousness, spiritual development, really connecting to the deeper part of ourselves in the universe. So thank you for bringing it together.
Yeah, you're welcome. And just to say one little add to that is that in sharing consciousness, we can step into the non-dual together, and in that we are experiencing our godlike self. So at the very highest level, which is the direction I always want to be moving towards, is towards God realization.
And a friend of mine does something called mutual awakening. So Google that and see Patricia Albert. Very interesting kind of practice. Anyway, we're over time. Thank you so much. Thank you, my loyal listeners, for tuning in. Without you, there is no show. And don't forget, if you did miss any part of today's show, you can always catch the replay on talkradio.nyc and on all your favorite podcasting platforms: Apple, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio. The Conscious Consultant Hour is on all of them. Thank you all for tuning in. Take care. We will talk to you all next week.